Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, members of the General Assembly. This is the 27th year of the General Assembly that they have held this vote. Each year, with the exception of one, the United States has voted against this resolution. As this resolution is currently constructed, the United States will oppose it again today. Cuba and its allies do the same thing every year. They propose a resolution blaming Cuba's poverty, repression, and lack of freedom on the United States. They falsely blame America for all kinds of evil things, even genocide. But this resolution changes nothing. It doesn't help a single Cuban family. It doesn't feed a single Cuban child. It doesn't free a single Cuban political prisoner. Those who support this resolution every year have it wrong. Our reason for the embargo is and has always been Cuba's denial of freedom and the denial of the most basic human rights for the Cuban people. The United States will continue to stand with the Cuban people until their rights and their freedoms are restored, period. We won't back down. Last year, we were joined by just one nation in voting against this resolution, and that's fine. We were in very good company. We have no problem standing alone on behalf of the things that we believe in, and will proudly do so again today if necessary. But the most regrettable fact of this resolution each year isn't that the United States may stand alone in opposing it. The most regrettable fact of this resolution is that it is a waste of everyone's time. It's one more time that countries feel they can poke the United States in the eye. But you're not hurting the United States when you do this. You're literally hurting the Cuban people by telling the regime that their treatment of their people is acceptable. For 27 years, we've had this debate, and nothing has changed in Cuba. At least nothing for the better. Supporters of the resolution claim that a change in U.S. policy would somehow transform life of the Cuban people. But the government of Cuba doesn't agree. It responded to the softening of our Cuba policy under President Obama with more, not less, political repression of its people. The sorry state of liberty and human rights in Cuba is not lost on anyone in this chamber, even as countries vote to blindly support the resolution every year. The proof is in the statements by countries during this annual debate. Many of us care deeply about the lack of freedom of expression and assembly in Cuba, the arbitrary arrests and detentions, the status of women and labor. We've listened carefully to our fellow countries' statements in this debate. We've studied your comments from last year. We've taken your messages to heart. We read last year's statement by the European Union, and we agree with it wholeheartedly. The EU called on Cuba to, quote, fully grant its citizens internationally recognized civil, political, and economic rights and freedoms, including freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and free access to information, unquote. Yesterday, multiple countries, speaking both for themselves and for regional groups, expressed concern for the realization in Cuba of the goals of prosperity, human rights, and human dignity contained in the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. Last year, the permanent representative of Gabon, speaking for the Africa Group, expressed this same concern. The ambassador from Singapore, speaking for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, also expressed the desire to end poverty and promote human rights and gender equality in Cuba, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. The permanent representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, speaking for the Caribbean community, echoed this support, as did the ambassador from Cote d'Ivoire, speaking for the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the Venezuelan ambassador, speaking on behalf of the non-alignment movement. In their national capacities, the permanent representatives of India, South Africa, Mexico, Indonesia, Chad, and St. Kitts and Nevis all advocated for Cuba to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've studied member states' expressions of support for freedom and human rights in other countries where, like Cuba, they are denied. For example, there are striking parallels between the suffering of the Cuban people under the Castro dictatorship and its successors and the suffering of the Iranian people under the dictatorship of the mullahs in Tehran. Like the Castro regime, the Iranian regime violently represses dissent, imprisons and kills its political opponents, and abuses women and religious and ethnic minorities. Like the Castro dictatorship, the Tehran government has rigged its economy in favor of its regime and its cronies. And both governments use these stolen funds to finance their aggression abroad. Each year, the General Assembly adopts a resolution condemning the Iranian regime's violation of human rights. Last year, the resolution was adopted with support of 81 member states. 81 countries made the decision to use this body's time and prestige to do what the United Nations does best, what it's meant to do. 81 countries put the weight of the international community behind the principles of peace, security, and human rights in Iran. They didn't just pay lip service to these principles. They put them in a resolution and they put it to a vote. They won. But most importantly, the cause of human rights in Iran won. The time has long passed for the General Assembly to do the same for Cuba, and for the same reasons. How can you feel strongly about Iran and not on Cuba? Countries that are concerned about the arrest of political opponents and journalists, the lack of access of the internet, and the absolute authority of the government to restrict travel both within and from Cuba. These countries should have the opportunity to vote to put themselves and this body on record. The United Nations does not have the ability or the authority to end the United States embargo of Cuba. But the United Nations has the unique ability to send a moral message to the Cuban dictatorship. We should use our megaphone to do something that has the potential to actually improve the lives of the Cuban people. The United States has proposed a series of amendments to this resolution. These amendments have been taken directly from you. They are the member states' expressions for hope for human rights in Cuba. Their content has been supplied by you. Their words are your words. This year, you will be asked to vote not just on the American embargo. You will be asked to vote on Cuba's political prisoners. You will be asked to vote on Cuba's lack of freedom of expression. You will be asked to vote on Cuba's oppression of workers. This year, you have the opportunity to do something that will send an unmistakable message to the people of Cuba that the world is not ignoring their suffering. For decades, the United Nations General Assembly has failed to demonstrate leadership in advocating for a better life for the Cuban people. Today, it can show leadership. I call on this assembly to vote to affirm the human rights and freedoms of the Cuban people that you extend to so many other countries. I call on member states to vote yes on each and every amendment proposed by the United States. Vote today to show the world that the United Nations General Assembly stands for human rights and human dignity. To the people of Cuba, I once again say to you, the United States will continue to stand with you, regardless of what others do. We will stand with you until the day comes that we stand together as a free people in our shared neighborhood. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. We shall now proceed to consider Draft Resolution A/73/L3 and draft amendments A/73/L9 to L16. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I wish to encourage delegations to make explanations of vote at one time in one intervention, before or after the consideration of all of the L documents presented. And now I give the floor to Austria, who will speak on behalf of the European Union. Austria has the floor.
Madam President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, and Albania, the country of the stabilization and association process and potential candidate, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the EFTA country, Liechtenstein, member of the European Economic Area, align themselves with this statement. Madam President, the economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed by the United States on Cuba has a damaging impact on the economic situation of the country and negatively affects the living standards of the Cuban people. External trade and foreign investment will play a crucial role in setting the country on a path towards sustainable growth. The EU considers therefore that lifting the embargo could facilitate the opening of the Cuban economy to the benefit of the Cuban people. The EU believes that positive change in Cuba is best brought about by closer engagement at all levels: government, economy, civil society, but also through people-to-people exchanges. We therefore deeply regret the reintroduction of restrictions on US relations with Cuba by the current US administration. The measures restricting individual self-directed travel in particular not only curtail the possibility for engagement with the Cuban people, but are also hitting Cuba's burgeoning private sector, which has benefited the most from such individual visits. Beyond the damaging impact of the embargo on ordinary Cubans, unilateral US sanctions and other unilateral administrative and judicial measures are also negatively affecting EU economic interests. We have firmly and continuously opposed any such measures due to their extraterritorial impact on the European Union in violation of commonly accepted rules of international trade. We cannot accept that unilaterally imposed measures impede our economic and commercial relations with Cuba. The EU Council of Ministers therefore adopted a regulation and a joint action to protect against undue interference and problems for EU citizens, businesses, and NGOs residing, working, or operating in Cuba. It is crucial that the United States continue to fully respect and implement the agreement reached at the summit between the European Union and the United States, held in London in May 1998. This agreement covers waivers to Titles 3 and 4 of the Helms-Burton Act, a commitment by the US government to resist future extraterritorial legislation of that kind, and an understanding regarding disciplines for the strengthening of investment protection. Madam President, for the EU, opening doors and closer engagement are the way to go with Cuba. The 1st of November 2018 marks the first anniversary of the provisional application of the EU-Cuba Political Dialogue and Cooperation Agreement, PDCA. The agreement has put our bilateral relationship on a new and solid legal footing and sets out an agenda of critical engagement with Cuba that will also allow us to support and accompany Cuba on its path of reform and modernization. We are enhancing dialogue and cooperation also on issues on which we still have fundamental differences. To this end, the PDCA has established a human rights dialogue as a key pillar of our relationship. The first formal meeting of the dialogue, held in a constructive and open atmosphere, took place last month. We reiterate our call on the Cuban government to fully grant its citizens internationally recognized civil, political, and economic rights and freedoms, including freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and free access to information, to ratify the UN Covenant for Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and to extend invitations to UN Special Rapporteurs to visit Cuba. We take due note of the amendments proposed by the United States. Such concerns were indeed brought up by several EU member states at the recent Universal Periodic Review of Cuba at the UN Human Rights Council. However, the EU considers that these have no place in the present resolution, which addresses a different, largely economic topic. In a particularly sensitive context, separate subjects should not be mixed, Any amendments not directly related to the subject matter should be avoided as they risk to unduly confuse the issue. Following the generational leadership change that took place in Cuba last April, and in the context of the ongoing constitutional reform process, we call on Cuba to pursue a comprehensive reform and modernization agenda, extending economic and social reforms and implementing them in a manner that will address the key concerns of the Cuban population, as well as meeting the legitimate aspirations of the Cuban people for more opportunities to participate in the shaping of the country's future. With the EU-Cuba political dialogue and cooperation agreement, the EU offers Cuba a consistent and reliable partnership to support it as it seeks to reform its political and economic model, to pursue sustainable development, and to find common solutions to global challenges, while we continue to promote democracy and respect for human rights vigorously. It is our considered view that the US embargo does not contribute to promoting these aims, but impedes their achievement. Against this background, the Member States of the European Union will vote unanimously in favor of the draft resolution. Thank you, Madam President.
Agradezco a Austria quien...
I thank Austria, who spoke on behalf of the European Union, and I now give the floor to Canada. Canada has the floor.
Madam President, as we've always done, Canada will vote in favor of the resolution on the necessity of ending the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the United States of America against Cuba. With respect to the proposed U.S. amendment to this resolution, Canada will vote no. Madame la Présidente.
President, Canada wishes to clarify that in voting against these amendments, it is not voting on the actual substance of the amendments. The motivation behind Canada's vote against these amendments proposed by the United States is that this resolution is not a suitable platform to consider Cuba's respect for its international human rights obligations. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Canada, and I now give the floor to Zambia. Zambia has the floor.
Madam President, not so long ago, in this General Assembly hall, and from the podium in front of us, the whole world paused as leader after leader extolled one of the greatest human beings that ever lived, Nelson Mandela. We extolled his virtues, we extolled his principles, we extolled the peace and reconciliation that he preached and lived by. At the end of the day, we all committed ourselves to a decade of peace. It was a beautiful moment. And to borrow the words of former President of the United States, Barack Obama, a teachable moment. Mandela's life, his philosophy, and what he stood for can be summed up in one word: Ubuntu. It means humanness. It means conscience. Humanness is not found in the big declarations we make or the grand projects and programs that we make as gestures of philanthropy. Rather, it is in the simple, the small, the mundane little day-to-day things we do to each other, for each other, with each other, and against each other that define our humanness. Ubuntu. Madam President, as we deal with this draft resolution on the necessity of ending the economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed by the United States of America against Cuba, let us ask ourselves in good conscience, are we living up to the test and the standard of Ubuntu, of humanness, that we were all extolling Mandela for. My country, Zambia, has many differences with how Cuba is run day by day. And we have many differences with how the United States of America is run day by day. Indeed, we have many differences with how every other country in the world is run day by day. What we know, however, and are prepared to defend without equivocation, is that these differences in perspective on life, on governance, are the right of people of each country to decide in accordance with their history, their culture, their circumstances. What is not in contention, and should never be in contention, is that the thread of life, the thread of humanness that runs in every Cuban is the same thread that runs in every one of us and in every American. I learned recently how the American law enforcement community resented the phrase mass incarceration to describe the phenomenon of the high incidence of a section of the population being imprisoned compared to other sections. They said every person arrested was arrested as an individual, tried as an individual for each crime committed, and on the specific evidence relating to each crime for which each individual is charged. Indeed, just as the US law enforcement community reject this group characterization, so too should the US government not continue with the group punishment on the people of Cuba, with the embargo imposed on ordinary people who have committed no crime whatsoever against the government or the people of the United States. Madam President, when we stand on this podium and say what we are saying, we are not doing so as a lynch mob baying for the blood of the United States. In my country, we have a saying that one who tells you how ugly you are is a good friend. The United States is a good friend. We say these things to appeal to the sense of Ubuntu, humanness, in the treatment of the people of Cuba. We say these things to appeal to the United States to live up to the high standards that it has set itself, the standard of democracy which compels all of us, if we choose to practice democracy, to accept the decision of the majority. For time after time, the overwhelming majority of the world, members of these United Nations, have voted in favor of this resolution, calling upon the United States to lift the embargo. Madam President, the United States is a big, powerful country, a great country. As it is stated in the Bible, to whom much is given, much is expected. Greatness lies not in the ability to subdue, but in the ability to uplift and inspire. Greatness lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the ability to repair and to build. Greatness lies in the ability, not in the ability to privilege from power, but in the ability to use power to protect the small and the weak and to enable the unable. Madam President, I beseech all of us to learn from a palm tree that withstands storm after storm, that greatness lies not in the ability to stand straight and rigid, but in the ability to stoop low enough to the level of one whom the gales of winds have knocked down and lift them up. My delegation will vote in favor of the resolution. I thank you.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank the permanent representative of Zambia. We have thus heard the last speaker who has taken the floor to explain their vote before the vote. The Assembly will now take a decision on a draft resolution A/73/L3 entitled Necessity of Ending the Economic, Commercial, and Financial Embargo Imposed by the United States of America against Cuba. In accordance with Rule 90 of the Rules of Procedure, the Assembly shall first take a decision on the draft amendments issued as documents A/73/L9 to L16 one by one. Before proceeding to take a decision on a draft resolution A/73/L3 and draft amendments A/73/L9 to L16, I wish to inform members that I have been approached by several delegations concerning the majority required for the adoption of these proposals. And taking note of the statements made by member states in the general debate, I shall first put to a recorded vote the question of whether a two-thirds majority of the members present and voting is required for the adoption of draft resolution A/73/L3 and the draft amendments contained in the documents A/73/L9 to L16 in accordance with Articles 83 and 84 of the Rules of Procedure.
Cuba. Reconozco a Cuba que está en este momento.
I recognize Cuba that is requesting the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Before adopting any decision, it should be crystal clear for all member states that proposals presented under item 43 of the agenda of this 73rd session of the UNGA on the necessity to put an end to the economic, commercial, and financial embargo on Cuba is an important question by virtue of Article 83 of the Rules of Procedure of the GA. In assigning the items in the agenda of the 73rd session of the GA, as indicated in document A/73/252, the Assembly defined item 43 as it has done for more than a decade under the heading Maintenance of International Peace and Security. Article 84 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly establishes that, and quote, decisions of the General Assembly on amendments to proposals related to important questions and on parts of such proposals put to the vote separately shall be made by a two-thirds majority of the members present and voting, end quote. Hence, both draft resolutions L3 and the proposed amendments contained in documents L9, L10, L11, L12, L13, L14, L15, and finally L16 required to be adopted the support of the two-thirds majority of the members present and voting. As you have seen, I'm requesting, in accordance with the rules of procedure of the UNGA, for item 43 to be considered an important questions, and those that all decisions, including the amendments presented, to be adopted only by a two-thirds majority. Cuba would appreciate that countries vote in favor of this motion, to vote green of this proposal made by Cuba. Thank you.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank the representative of Cuba. On this item, I would like to clarify that in accordance with Article 18, Paragraph 3 of the Charter, this question will be settled by a simple majority of the members present and voting.
Reconozco a la delegación.
The delegation of the United States has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. A simple majority is required for the adoption of the U.S. proposed amendments. Cuba's resolution and our amendments don't rise to the standard required for a two-thirds majority. They are solely about economic, human rights, and social issues. I would refer the membership to a decision of this Assembly on June 22nd of this year, where the Assembly decided that a resolution on Moldova would be subject to a simple majority of those present and voting. If that resolution on Russia's military forces in Moldova was subject to a simple majority, then surely this one, with the related amendments on economic, human rights, and social issues, is also subject to a simple majority. I urge all member states to vote against a decision that a two-thirds majority is required. Thank you.
Agradezco a la representante.
I thank the representative of the United States of America, and I will repeat, I'd like to clarify that in accordance with Article 18, Paragraph 3 of the Charter, this question will be settled by a simple majority of the members present and voting. Before giving the floor to speakers to explain their vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and that they should be made by delegations from their seats. Once again, I have on my list the United States of America. I understand that you have taken the floor on this item.
Debido que no existe.
Due to the fact that there are no more requests for the floor before the vote, explanations of vote before the vote, we will now proceed to take a decision on the question of whether a two-thirds majority of the members present and voting is required for the adoption of a draft resolution A/73/L3 and its amendments. So those in favor of the application of a two-thirds majority requirement for the adoption of draft resolution A/73/L3 and its amendments, please signify. Those against and abstentions, and those in favor.
No.
The General Assembly is now voting on the majority required for the adoption of draft resolution A/73/L3. Those in favor of the application of the two-thirds majority requirement should press yes. Those against the application of the two-thirds majority requirement should press no. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado de la
The result of the vote is as follows. Votes in favor of the application of the two-thirds majority requirement for the adoption of draft resolution A/73/L3 and its amendments, 126. Votes against, 9, and abstentions, 52. As a result, the Assembly has decided that a two-thirds majority of the members present and voting is required for the adoption of draft resolution A/73/L3. Therefore, pursuant to Rule 84 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly, a two-thirds majority of the members present and voting is also required for the adoption of draft amendments A/73/L9 to L16.
Antes de dar la palabra, vamos a proceder ahora.
We will now proceed to adopt a decision on the draft resolution A/73/L3 and the draft amendments A/73/L9 to L16. The Assembly will now proceed to adopt a decision on the draft amendments A/73/L9. A recorded vote has been requested, and as a result, we are going to begin the voting procedure. Those who are in favor of the draft amendment A/73/L9, please signify, as well as those against and abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/73/L9. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado de la votación.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 3. Against, 113, and abstentions, 67. The draft amendment contained in document A/73/L9 is not adopted.
La Asamblea procederá.
The Assembly shall now take a decision on draft amendment A/73/L10. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft amendment A/73/L10, please signify. Those against and abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/73/L10. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado de la.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 3. Against, 115. Abstentions, 65. The draft amendment contained in document A/73/L10 is not adopted.
La Asamblea
The Assembly shall now take a decision on draft amendment A/73/L11. A recorded vote has been requested. We should now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft amendment A/73/L11, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/73/L11. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado de la
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 3. Against, 114. Abstentions, 66. The draft amendment contained in document A/73/L11 is not adopted.
La Asamblea procederá.
The Assembly shall now take a decision on a draft amendment A/73/L12. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of a draft amendment A/73/L12, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/73/L12. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado de
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 4. Against, 114. Abstentions, 65. The draft amendment contained in document A/73/L12 is not adopted.
La Asamblea procederá ahora.
The Assembly shall now take a decision on draft amendment A/73/L13. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft amendment A/73/L13, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/73/L13. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 3. Against, 114. Abstentions, 65. The draft amendment contained in document A/73/L13 is not adopted. The Assembly shall now take a decision on draft amendment A/73/L14. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft amendment A/73/L14, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/73/L14. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado de la votación.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor 3, against 114, abstentions 66. The draft amendment contained in document A/73/L14 is not adopted.
La Asamblea.
The Assembly shall now take a decision on a draft amendment A/73/L15. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft amendment A/73/L15, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/73/L15. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado de la votación.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor 3, against 114, abstentions 66. The draft amendment contained in document A/73/L15 is not adopted.
La Asamblea procederá.
The Assembly shall now take a decision on draft amendment A/73/L16. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft amendment A/73/L16, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/73/L16. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor 3, against 114, abstentions 66. The draft amendment contained in document A/73/L16 is not adopted.
Consideraremos ahora.
We will now consider draft resolution A/73/L3. A recorded vote is requested for this draft resolution. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of a draft resolution A/73/L3, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/73/L3 entitled Necessity of Ending the Economic, Commercial and Financial Embargo imposed by the United States of America against Cuba. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen?
El resultado.
Sorry, no. Okay, I'll go ahead now. The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
El resultado.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 189. Against, 2. Abstentions, 0. Draft Resolution A/73/L3 is therefore adopted.
Antes de dar la palabra.
Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats.
Tiene la palabra.
I give the floor to the United States of America.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm always taken aback when I hear applause in this chamber at moments like this, because there are no winners here today. There are only losers. The United Nations has lost. It has rejected the opportunity to speak on behalf of human rights. The UN Charter commits every country here to the promotion of peace, security, and human rights. And that charter was betrayed today. Once again, we were reminded why so many people believe that faith in the United Nations is often misplaced. The countries that profess to believe in human rights have lost too. They have earned a justified measure of doubt that they will act to defend their beliefs. And most of all, the Cuban people have lost. They have been left, once again, to the brutal whims of the Castro dictatorship. They have been abandoned by the United Nations and by most of the world's governments. But the Cuban people are not alone today. The United States of America stands with them. The people of Cuba are our neighbors and our friends, and they are fellow children of God. The American people will stand with them until they are restored the rights that God has given us all, rights that no government can legitimately deny its people. While today's votes were not admirable, they were highly illuminating. And that light contributes to the cause of truth, which is the essential basis of freedom and human rights. Thank you.